An early morning in Rochester, Minnesota. Mayo Clinic, which each day provides the best care possible to thousands of patients. It's a little after 7 o'clock in the morning, and that means that nearly 30,000 Mayo Clinic staff are currently busy brushing their teeth, combing their hair, and getting ready to come to work. But how will all of those people get to work? Okay, well, there's some people who will walk, some carpool. Okay, that saves some parking spaces. Oh, look, there's some people riding the bus. And there's a person riding a bike. And hey, look over there. There's 3 people walking up from the subway. Wait a minute. Subway? In Rochester? No, it's not that type of subway. This one is for pedestrians only. Well, that solves that. There are no subway trains in Rochester, Minnesota. But there is a very complex system of pedestrian subway tunnels that connect many of the buildings at Mayo Clinic. Rochester, Minnesota gets cold during the winter months. Really cold. So cold that it hurts to go outside. That's one of the best reasons for why these subway tunnels exist here. Pedestrians have the ability to shed their winter gear and enjoy climate-controlled transit throughout the clinic. They can walk from building to building, find a place to eat, enjoy a nice conversation, all beneath the surface and out of Mother Nature's way.
The Skyway and subway system have really become a necessity here and something that is a uniqueness for Rochester. Also, it provides a unique perspective of town. It's a connection to parking, it's a connection to lodging, and it really connects us all here in the downtown area.
Despite what you might have heard, these tunnels have not been around forever, but they didn't just spring up overnight either. By the beginning of the 20th century, the physicians in Rochester had come together with a shared vision.
That science was increasing, knowledge was increasing so rapidly that no 2 or 3 men could ever encompass it.
In 1901, a man by the name of Dr. Henry Plummer joined the practice. Dr. Plummer, in addition to being a talented physician, was very interested in mechanics. He developed a system for keeping medical records known today as the dossier system. When it came time to build the 1914 clinic building, Dr. Plummer was asked to help in its design. Dr. Will Mayo had these words to say about the 1914 building.
The object of this building is to furnish permanent house, wherein scientific investigation can be made into the cause of the diseases which afflict mankind, and wherein every effort shall be made to cure the sick and the suffering.
7 years later, in 1921, a tunnel was installed to connect that 1914 building to the Damon Hotel. Soon to follow was another tunnel, and this one would join the Kaler Hotel to the clinic.
I think it was really Dr. Will in 1910 when he said the needs of the patient come first, and I think it was just a part of that philosophy that made them think of how could they get patients to and from the hospital to the hotel to the clinic, and the best way to do that in the winter, of course, is underground where it's warm.
An underground city flourishes now in Rochester. Guests in the city's leading hotels can now buy clothing, get their shoes shined, obtain the latest newspapers and magazines, and purchase drugs, all underground. The extensive systems of tunnels designed primarily for the convenience of hotel guests makes it possible to travel many blocks and do a day's shopping without coming outdoors.
In the early 20s, it was impractical for each building at the clinic to produce its own heat. To solve this problem, the Franklin Power Station was created to provide steam power and heat to every building on campus. Natural gas was a new thing back then, and it was chosen as the source for fuel at the Franklin Power Station. In order to use natural gas at the station, however, Mayo would have to pay to install a pipeline from Kansas all the way up to Rochester, Minnesota, because the farthest north that natural gas had come by the 20s was Kansas. Once the station had its fuel supply, they needed to dig steam tunnels between the clinic buildings. At the time, since the local hotels had already started the subway trend, the clinic suggested that they go ahead and install pedestrian tunnels parallel to the steam tunnels. The subway acted as a convenient transportation method for patients and employees over the next 30 years. It's kind of ironic that such a large underground area evolved at the clinic, because it was a tornado in 1883 that had unified the St. Mary's Sisters with Dr. William Worrell Mayo, laying the foundation for the clinic.
Wrote about the end of private practice.
It's nice to know that if a tornado like that ever passed back through again, people would have somewhere safe to be. But it's not always natural disasters that cause people to take cover underground, and that was agreed upon in the early 1960s.
Everybody agrees that fallout shelters are the best means of civilian defense in the event of a nuclear war, but apparently nobody does anything about it.
The disaster committee at Mayo wanted to do something about it. They suggested the subway tunnels as an ideal place to build such a shelter. The subway tunnels beneath the Mayo building were ideal for a shelter because, one, it wouldn't cost the clinic much to build, with most of the cost being paid by the government, and two, it could protect more than 2,200 people during an explosion. The Board of Governors approved plans for the project, but luckily they never had to use it. By the early 70s, not much had changed in the subway tunnels. It was around this time that Mayo started finding additional uses for the underground network. One example of this is the Green Hornet, a small vehicle that would transport thousands of pounds of X-ray film each day. The Green Hornet was capable of speeds of up to 12 miles per hour and could go 30 miles before requiring a battery recharge. Underground innovations continued throughout the late 20th century. One of those developments followed a big power outage in 1979.
It affected the downtown campus for a period of time, and I'm sure the subways were awfully dark during that period, but any staff that was on duty reassured the patients and tried to bring them or direct them to a place where there was a little additional lighting.
After the outage, Mayo installed emergency lighting systems and still has them today. In 1986, the 1914 building was torn down to make way for the construction of the Siebens building. That was the same year that Renee Ziemer started working at the clinic, and at that time, artwork was still hard to find in many of the subway tunnels.
The subway tunnels were pretty plain. They didn't do much artwork. The colors were pretty dull. Lighting wasn't always the best, so they were kind of dark and dreary. But over the years, I've seen a change in that, where they've actually, incorporated artwork in different colors to brighten them up and added additional lights.
A patient of mine was named Yaakov Agam, and he wanted to give us one of his pieces. And you find one room in the Gonda building on the ground floor. The whole room is his work. Thing, it turns around slowly, it has color. He sent a little miniature of it, what it was going to look like. They said that they thought the farmers wouldn't like it and wasting time, money. And we got some to go up there and take a look at this. And then, of course, they fell in love with this work. It's not only did people like it, hell, they wrote the board, great way to relax, My wife's in the hospital and has had an operation. I spent all day watching this thing slowly revolve, And anyway, making a long story short, we finally got permission. Board saw this thing, accepted the gift. They paid the freight, and that's why you have the Yaakov Agam here.
In the years that followed, the clinic began to see more and more of that new art filling the walls and dazzling patients.
They wanted to put something on the wall, and you walk through the subway today, you'll see prints of Agam's work and other people all over the place.
In 1987, the subway between the Siebens building and the Mayo building was expanded and improved. Improvements have continued until today, in 2007, when the system has grown to connect more than 14 buildings at the clinic.
Primarily it's just a way to get to and from a building, but I know our general service people use it every day. Also, a lot of the staff use it for walking to get the extra exercise that they need in a day.
With all of those people down there, it's no remarkable accident that businesses were soon to follow.
The Skyway and subway system provide, I always say, a second and a third main street to Rochester. We have obviously our street level, but the Skyway and subway provide another venue for a business to be located and easily accessed.
What began simply as a connection between the 1914 building and the Damon Hotel, the current sites of the Stevens Building and the Gonda Building, has since then expanded to most of the downtown campus. Miles of tunnels, some not even shown on this map, are now in place. And there are many tunnels that only Mayo Clinic staff can access.
The tunnels are not all the same. It kind of depends if you're in some of the older tunnels. You'll notice that it's more brickwork. Where the newer tunnels, they actually have panels. They're a little more colorful than the older tunnels.
This 1957 map of the tunnels shows the Mayo Building connected to the Plummer Building, the Methodist Hospital, and the line going down to the right to the Medical Sciences Building. In 1986, a map showing almost the same image, and if we look at that map today, you can see how much growth has happened over the last 2 decades. You can see the array of tunnels on the left, but then on the other side you can see the expansion of skyways. The skyways were added by the city of Rochester and, together with the subways, create a metropolitan atmosphere in downtown Rochester. Although decorative, sometimes the passages can frustrate people who are trying to find their way around.
We find that most of the time people have to operate by landmarks, and it is challenging and provides a challenge, but the number one wayfinding system is other human beings. And what you'll find in Rochester is the residents and the workers and the people that are very familiar with the system are always helping visitors. There's about $90 million worth of expansion in the downtown this year alone. The number one question that people always ask is, can we get it connected via skyway or subway? And there was recently a study put out that you have to kind of be careful of that development and of that connection, because what you're going to do is kill your street level business sector. A lot of times we see that where people might drive through the city and say, well, there's nothing happening, there's no vibrancy here. Well, that's because it's all happening in those walkways.
The vibrancy of the tunnels today over their historical predecessors is linked to the amount of art that has been added over the years.
Because people in general have become more accustomed to seeing this sort of thing in their little places in the towns they live in, that's why. And if they go into any museum, this is the kind of stuff they see.
Just as the patients, visitors, and employees of the Mayo Clinic have grown accustomed to seeing decorative hallways, they have also maintained the Rochester way of comfort.
They really provide shelter and security and safety for folks, and it's convenience. It provides a lot of value and convenience to folks. They don't have to mess around with ground transportation.
I think if Dr. Will was alive today, he'd be very impressed with our whole complex. I know that both Dr. Will and Dr. Charlie fought growth. They struggled with it even during their lifetime. And so to see the medical center the way it is today, I think they would be very overwhelmed.
As the day comes to a close, the once bustling subway tunnels begin to clear out. It will be interesting to see how the subway system continues to grow as new ways are discovered to provide the best care to every patient, every day at Mayo Clinic.